Question. With Thanksgiving coming up, would it be okay to have an alternative gathering on Thanksgiving Day with Muslims to give them other options rather than them going to Thanksgiving dinners? You know, people are off work and have an available day. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka nabina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Honestly, the words alternative gathering and the motive of giving other options rather than going to Thanksgiving dinners makes this practice one that Muslims should avoid. And this is supported by the following. Number one, Muslims are prohibited from celebrating the holidays of the non-Muslims, and this entails not doing on their holidays the things that they customarily do on those days in observance or to celebrate. For example, gathering, feasting, gift giving, etc. And Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala has mentioned in volume number 25 of Majmu' al-Fatawa, he's mentioned something along this lines and mentioned specific practices which are observed by the non-Muslims on their holidays, and mentioned that those practices are prohibited for the Muslims to observe on those same days, even if they're doing so not in celebration. Number two, Muslims are expected to differ and distinguish themselves from the disbelievers in everything that is specific to them, and imitating them in these specific matters is absolutely prohibited. And obviously, one of the things that is specific, one of the matters which is specific to the non-Muslims are their holidays, their festivals and celebrations. And it's prohibited for the Muslims to imitate the non-Muslims in anything which is specific to them, as the Prophet said in the hadith, وَمَنْ تَشَبَّهَ بِقَوْمٍ فَهُوَ مِنْهُمْ. Whoever imitates a people is one of them. When Muslims seek to observe alternatives to non-Muslim holidays, they are in effect imitating them, but under a different name. Calling what they're doing by a different name doesn't change its reality. If we have a celebration, a festival, a feast on Thanksgiving Day, but call it by a different name, it's just an alternative gathering, we're still basically doing what they do, and we're basically imitating them, but just calling it by a different name, thereby following the letter of the law, but not the spirit. And it's important for Muslims to remember that the Jews were in the habit of doing this, following the letter of the law, but not the spirit, and they were punished and cursed for it. And for evidence for this, see Surah Al-A'raf, the 7th chapter, verses 163 through 166 for an example of this. Thirdly, when a practice is not purely exclusive to non-Muslims, but more common to them than to Muslims. In those cases, Muslims are encouraged to be different from them and distinguish themselves by refraining from the practice or doing the opposite. This is supported by the many statements of the Prophet, which he prefaced with the words, Khaliful Yahuda wa Nasara, be different from the Jews and Christians. Khaliful Majus, be different from the Magians. Khaliful Mushrikeen, be different from the pagans. Being different from them in this case would necessitate not gathering for dinner on Thanksgiving, because it is a day on which they gather for dinner. Fourth and lastly, during the time of the Prophet and his companions, sallallahu alaihi wasallam wa ridwanullahi ta'ala alayhim, and throughout Islamic history, Muslims have lived in the proximity of non-Muslims, and in many cases as religious minorities in the lands of non-Muslims. When the non-Muslims celebrated their holidays, we have no record of the Muslims holding alternative gatherings. If this was something good, the Prophet ﷺ and his companions would have done it, or scholars throughout the centuries would have encouraged it. The fact that they did not is a clear indication that not doing so is Islamic orthodoxy, and doing so is a deviation from orthodoxy. And this is what comes to mind regarding this issue, and I hope this response helps. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us all, particularly those of us Muslims who are living in the West and can be influenced by our environment and become products of our environment, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the will to suffice ourselves with Islam and be satisfied with what Islam has given us of rituals, of beliefs, and of holidays and celebrations. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.